What's up, Tsla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm also going to talk about why tomorrow is going to be a very important day as we have CPI data coming out, not to mention new developments on the charts. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention an 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. The offer ends very soon in 2.5 weeks. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with Tesla. So Tesla's continuing to make higher highs and higher lows, breaking out very nicely. We got some good news that came out involving Chinese registrations and helped Tesla push even higher as well. So with all the hype and all the news, Tesla is looking like it's trying to get up to all-time highs, which are very close to about that 414 area. And there's a chance Tesla will try to surpass them. However, whether it happens tomorrow or not may depend on CPI data. That's why I'm going to talk about some news and such first before I break down CPI. Then I'll talk about the charts after that. But just to be frank, if we continue this trend, the all-time high could be coming for 414. If we lose 400 because of CPI, we're looking for essentially the 393 area, which is where our imbalance happens to be. So we'll be watching these levels closely, and I'll talk more about this in just a few minutes. So the first thing worth mentioning is that Tesla ended up pushing to the $400 price target. We ended up seeing this after Morgan Stanley analysts, not to mention Bank of America analysts, all came out and they're very, very bullish on Tesla, saying the same thing that they're expecting 400 or 421. Fubon Securities also talked about 472 as a target. So we're seeing the majority of analysts very bullish, and Tesla helped make that a real possibility. On top of that, there is this news right over here about how the Chinese registrations have come out. Looking at them, we saw about 21,900 registrations for Tesla for the week of December 2nd through the 8th, which is up 17% for the previous week, and is tallying to the second best week of this year and the third best in Tesla's history. So very strong week in China for Tesla. Very awesome to see those sales going up, and I think that's another awesome piece of news. That's what helped Tesla push alongside this news right here. The headlines are continuing to come out about how Tesla has their new Model Q, as it's being referred to as now. It should be coming out in the first half of 2025 with a $30,000 price tag, if not below that, depending on factors. So some sources are saying 30,000 euros, others are saying 30,000 US dollars. Either way, it's going to be a lot more affordable. It should be having half as many parts as the Model 3 and the Model Y, and there's a lot of growth potential in it because of the fact that margins should be a lot better with less parts and factors like that. So that's what I'm hearing and seeing on the news. This is part of why Tesla's continuing this run. Lots of excitement involving the Cybercab. Keep in mind, 2025 starts in just a couple of weeks, and that same year, 2025 is when this should be coming out. That's going to be massive. I can't wait to see if that ends up being the case. Now, as far as Tesla goes, Cantor Fitzgerald has come out. They gave Tesla a neutral rating, whereas Morgan Stanley gave Tesla an overweight rating just yesterday. Once again, maintaining the $400 price target. That's some very, very good news. I think that's very, very bullish. And the price-price ratio is going up because, once again, Tesla's outperforming the market. Historically, Wednesdays tend to be green about 48% of the time, 48% of the time, excuse me. And then we also tend to see more volatility around 11 o'clock a.m. and 1 p.m. So that's pretty much it for data. There's not much else coming out for Tesla, at least on that end. Now, for the market as a whole, okay, we had a more red day. We saw Nvda in the red. A lot of sectors more red, like finance. Even Microsoft was in the red. However, Google, Meta, and Tesla managed to hold up a lot better alongside some other tickers. So the majority of stocks were in the red, but there were some notable greens, such as Tesla pushing in Google. So that's what's worth noting. Now, tomorrow we have big data coming out. Tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. Do not forget that at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the very important CPI reports coming out. We have core CPI, month over month and year over year, and then CPI for all items month over month and year over year as well. We're expecting core CPI to be around 0.3% on a month over month basis, which is essentially the same as before. And then year over year, we're expecting core to be at 3.3%, the same as before as well. We're expecting a slight, teeny little increase in CPI for all items. Month over month is expecting 0.3%, a slight increase, and then 2.7% for year over year, a slight increase for all items. So we're expecting all items CPI to be the same, if not a teeny bit hotter by 0.1%. Then we're expecting all the core numbers to be the same. Looking at the data, core was basically very stagnant up here. There's a good chance it might remain in that trend. And then for all items CPI, we're expecting it to go up just a teeny tiny bit. We'll see if it ends up coming down instead, depending on some factors. But I do want to talk about some good news. Looking at the data, okay, as you guys can see, there tends to be a high correlation between CPI and crude futures. And notice that when they go up, they tend to move up together, they tend to fall together, they tend to move in the same directions, right? Even if it's not exactly the same. So why is this significant? Well, check this out, guys. Back in September, crude futures were at 69.47 and CPI was at 2.4 for all items year over year. Okay, and then go to October and you will see that crude went up to 71 and CPI went up to about 2.6. So they did go up together in the month of October. For the month of November, CPI comes out for the month of November. By the way, the data comes out tomorrow, but crude futures is showing that uh, the overall numbers went down for crude oil, down to about 69, from 71 to 69. That typically suggests that there could be a slight decrease in all items CPI. That's what the data suggests somewhat more. So we'll see about that. Nothing is always guaranteed, of course, but we'll see. But just know that there might be a slight increase in the month of November because of that. Now, our data shows us that we just have GameStop announced their earnings. Earnings were very mixed. Tomorrow we have Macy's and a few others like Adobe, then Costco on Thursday. So just keep that in mind. For GameStop, GameStop reported third quarter adjusted earnings of 6 cents per share on the net sales of about $860 million. Once again, that's above expectations in terms of their EPS, but their sales were below expectations at 860 million. We were expecting 888 million instead, so it came in a little bit below expectations. Despite that, their sales were down about 20% from the year prior. Not the best of news, and their guidance was so-so. So very mixed earnings. Something's good, something's bad. GameStop is flat as a result of that. The market's neutral in terms of sentiment. We're between fear and greed. Don't forget that momentum is also at greed right here. It's kind of slowing down just a little bit. Besides that, the puts and call option ratio is showing extreme greed. This is decreasing a little bit more. And then volatility is also at neutral, stuck in the middle. This is going to be dictated a lot by what happens for tomorrow. So the market's neutral, waiting for the big move for tomorrow. But now let's just focus on the charts. What do I think is going to pan out from this point? Well, it all depends on the notorious CPI report. I think that's going to be the biggest factor for Tesla. Do we get a hot CPI or a decent one? If CPI is hot tomorrow and not good, you want to see Tesla lose 400 to 400 fails. We're looking for essentially 392. However, even if we do get a small dip because of CPI, Tesla is still very bullish as we're making higher highs and higher lows. It's going to likely just dip and then bounce later on anyways. If we get a decent CPI and the whole market bounces, Tesla could be looking for an attempt to get back up to the high, and we could be testing the 410 area and eventually 414. So it could go either way. We do look bullish, technically speaking, so the chart does favor upside. So I'm hoping that we get a decent CPI and Tesla does not lose 400, and we try to go up for that 400 target. Now, it could go either way depending on how these factors end up moving, but just know that Tesla's doing a good job at holding up, and the odds do favor the upwards direction. For other factors out there, we have SPY. SPY is on a bit of a downtrend right here, but we're approaching our 50 EMA. That's going to be at 602. If CPI is hot tomorrow and we get a rug pull, okay, we're looking for 602 to fail to go down to 600 and eventually back down to about 598. And by hot, I'm referring to being 0.2% above what we're expecting. That's what a hot CPI would look like. If we get a decent CPI and we try to bounce, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to 604, then 606. I think right now the chart is favoring 602 holding. I might try to rebound for 605 around that area or above. But who knows, guys? It could go either way as we are technically on the downtrend. We haven't officially bounced yet. So it all depends on CPI. The optimist in me is saying that CPI will be okay and we'll try to balance, but just to be safe, we have to wait and see. It's always important to be very pragmatic nonetheless. So let's see if we end up holding around 602. If that holds, there's going to be a chance that we attempt to rebound. So please keep that in mind. For other factors out there, if we continue to get a decent CPI, we could be looking for ES to try to rebound here. I do anticipate it's going to dip a little bit more, so it might be on its way back down to these lower levels, such as like 60-40 flat. That could happen tomorrow morning before CPI comes out. But we'll have to see if we get the bounce and the big reaction once it is officially out. So if we get a decent CPI, once we retest 60-40, we could be looking for a bounce back up to 60-60 or even above that. If CPI is not good and we end up continuing to fall, there's going to be a risk of us coming back down to about that, not only 60-20 area, but even below to like the lower 6,000 zone. So we do look bearish, look for a small dip tomorrow morning. Then we'll see what happens with the notorious report of CPI. Hopefully it causes a bounce back up towards 60-60. So we'll see how it goes from there. For other factors out there, we also happen to have, let me just double check this, Nvda. Nvidia is dipping, but just look at this, guys. Okay, we have a range right here. We like to get bought back up around 132 to 135, and we like to reject off 148 to 150. Notice that we're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So this suggests that there could be a little bit more downside. Maybe we see 132, maybe. We'll have to see about that. But keep in mind that there's a lot of demand between 132 and 134 historically. So if we lose 132, we turn bearish. If we hold it, we could be looking for a big bounce back up to 140 or so. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. So I think that's there's a good chance that we dip a little bit and then we try to bounce uh, off that support as the most likely possibility. So we'll see about that. For Bitcoin, this is trying to base around 93,600, not to mention 94,000. We might be on our way back up to 98,000. Could be a small bounce here depending on how things end up going. For NQ, unfortunately, we are forming a nice head and shoulders. This looks a little bit more bearish, so it might try to retest 21,356, and we'll see if we bounce off that or not to get back up to 21,500. If we lose this, there is a gap to fill. There's also this imbalance down here to fill it. So we'll see how it goes. So watch for a test of 21,356 tomorrow morning. Then when CPI comes out, we'll see if we get a huge bounce off of it or not. So that's going to be causing like a really, really big move. If we break 21,500, we turn back up, but look for a dip and then maybe a bounce as the most likely possibilities. For the QQQ, we have 520 as our main support. If that fails us, we're looking for essentially 517, which is where the gap happens to be. If we break back above essentially 520, we're looking for 523. So will we get a bounce to 523 because of CPI, or do we end up getting a rug pull back below? The chart is technically suggesting we might dip a little bit more to fill the gap before we try to bounce. So we'll see what CPI gives us. We do look a little bit more bearish on the QQQ off this head and shoulders, but just to be safe, we'll see what CPI brings us. For Apple, we look more bullish. We could be looking for 248 and 250 as our target, so we could be pushing a little bit more. And we'll see if we get some kind of rejection or not. We'll look for a little bit more upside just to start things off. Netflix is not looking that great, at least for the time being, because of the fact that we had this high near the 940 area. We came down into lower high. So if we lose 910, we're looking for a move back down to about 903. And if we hold above 910, we're looking for an attempt to break past 923. If that breaks, we turn more bullish. So watch to see if 914 holds. If it holds, we're looking for a bigger pump to much higher levels. So let's see if that ends up being the case. We could be pushing for essentially 923, and we'll give this the time it needs for a bigger pump. For MSTR, we look more bullish. We're looking for essentially 382. If that breaks, we're looking for essentially 390. And if this rejects, we're dipping back down. My guts tell me that we're holding support very nicely, so we could attempt this rebound for essentially 382. And we'll see if we break it or not. There is some potential as we're trying to base around this 360 area. For Celsius, we're hitting tough resistance around 30.8. If we break that, we go higher. And if we come short, we're going to be looking for a dip back down to about 30. So we'll see how things end up going. If we get this rejection, we're looking for essentially 30, not to mention 29.6. And we'll see how it goes from here. So look for a dip as the most likely possibility, and we'll see if we bounce, but that also depends on CPI, of course. Supermicro looks a little bit weaker here. We're kind of stuck in this range. We might be dipping closer to about that 38 area before it tries to bounce back up to about 42. But overall, there's a bit of a downtrend after this big red day. So the chart favors about 38 before anything else. For Palantir, we had a big red bar and a rejection here, so we have to get back above 72 to bounce. If we can't do that, we are going to be at risk of coming back down to about 69 before it tries to rebound. So look for a risk of 69 before it tries to bounce is the most likely possibilities. We have this big red bar here, so odds do favor this dip and a bounce. Give that some time to develop for a little bit more downside. Palantir, alongside Rivian, do look a little bit more bearish. We rejected off 15, so this could be continuing to dip to 14 flat. If that fails us, I think 13.37 becomes a stronger possibility before we officially bounce. So look for a little bit more downside before we try to get that rebound, and we'll see how things end up going from here. This will also depend on CPI, but just give it some time. For SoFi is on a bit of a downtrend right here. We have this resistance to watch around 15.5, and the main support's at 15 flat. This is favoring 15 flat or below, so watch and see how this ends up moving. For the IWM Russell 2000, we're on a bit of a downtrend right over here looking at this channel. We could be retesting 236, and we'll see if we bounce back up to about 238, but otherwise we're kind of stuck in the middle. For AMD, we look a little bit weaker. We have not gotten the bounce yet. We do love to bounce historically very close to about 127 to 125. So I'm hoping we get a bounce very close to this area. It might dip a little bit more closer to 125 before the bounce comes. If we get that bounce, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to 130. So we'll see how we end up moving from here. For ARM, we are rejecting off our key EMAs. We need to get back above 140 to remain bullish. Otherwise, we're favoring this imbalance fill down here towards 134. So we could be dipping back down to 134, and we'll see how we end up reacting. And there's going to be a risk of us dipping lower, at least for the time being. For Coinbase, we have a double top leg structure. We're looking a little bit more bearish. We'll have to see if we reclaim 312. Otherwise, we favor downside. And we could be on our way back down for 300, then 294. So look for 300 and 294 as our main supports. We'll see if we bounce off those levels or not. But just know that there is going to be a risk of us dipping a little bit lower. So keep that in mind, guys. We'll see how it goes from here, and then be very, very mindful as well. So with that being said, for what else I'm looking for is going to be a big reaction, at least from that lower level. So there might be a little bit more downside before anything else, and then look for a bounce between 30 and then 293. For Amazon, we look a little bit weaker. We might be retesting 225. If we hold that, we will try to bounce back up to 228. But if 225 fails, there's going to be a risk of us coming down to 222. Now, obviously, it depends on CPI. That's going to cause us to either bounce back up to 228, or we start dumping all the way down to about the 222 area. So could go either way, but just know there is that risk of downside. So just keep that in mind, and we'll see how things end up going from here. I also want to mention the fact that there is that risk of us dipping lower. Looking at the big red bar. So we do favor downside a little bit more before we try to bounce. Meta has a possible head and shoulders like structure. We're looking for 612 as our main support. If that fails us, we're looking for essentially 598. And if we get that bounce, we're looking for a bigger move right back up. So give this the time it needs, at least from the way that we are developing. If we lose 612, we're looking for a move all the way back down for about that 607 area. So there's a slight head and shoulders, which tends to favor downside, but we'll see depending on CPI. Microsoft is holding up decently, but it is dipping here. So it's favoring 441, and we'll see if it bounces off that or not. So just know that with the way things are moving, there's going to be a risk of us dipping a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. I think that we could be looking for that dip, and then we'll see what kind of reaction we get, at least from there. So there might be a test of 441. We'll see if CPI causes a bounce or not. So just keep that in mind as the most likely possibility. Google's looking very bullish. We're breaking out very strongly right now. We're very strong and doing an amazing job. So we'll see if we continue this push back up to 188 to 190, and then we'll see what kind of reaction we get. But just know we still remain more bullish, and then we'll see how it goes, at least from this point on. For other factors out there, we have GameStop. It's very flat. It did see this wick form only to come back down, only up about 3% because they did beat on EPS. Earnings were not that strong, unfortunately. That's why the share price is not really moving too much. So that's the reason why it's kind of stuck, at least from this point. So just keep that in mind, guys. That's why we're trading the way we are. In order for us to see more upside, we want to see if we could get a bounce back above 28 and then eventually 30. Otherwise, we just consolidate over here. AMC is also consolidating around 4.4, so I'm not really expecting much. DJT might be dipping to about 33.23, so we'll see what kind of reaction we get from there as well. The VIX is trying to hold above 14.23. If we break that, we're looking for a bigger push for the 15s, which would be bearish for the markets. But if we get a rejection, okay, if CPI is decent, we reject. We're looking for 13.8s to break to fill this gap down here. That would favor a little bit more upside for the markets. The 10-year also has a gap to fill, and then the dollar is kind of dipping here. So right now, the market's indecisive. We're just waiting for the big move. So we'll see if Tesla surpasses all-time highs. As long as we hold above 400, there's a chance we will eventually get there. Will it be tomorrow? That depends on CPI. CPI could launch this thing back up to about 410 and 414. But if we get a rug pull on Tesla, we're looking for a move back down to about 400, then all the way back down to 393. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. Please have an absolutely fantastic rest of your days, nights, or evenings, wherever you guys are around the world. And just know that the market's doing a decent job. It's still holding up. Even if we are on a bit of a downtrend move for the very short term, the medium term still remains more bullish as buyers will still return. So I would say this, just be very, very patient with your levels, give the market the time it needs to develop, and we'll be very, very keen on what's about to happen. I'll be back tomorrow before market open to give you guys another update. So until then, I hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic rest of your night. Get ready for CPI coming out for tomorrow, and make sure you watch the levels I called out. Thank you for listening, guys. I appreciate you guys so much for your attention. I'll be back tomorrow for another update. Thank you for listening, and peace out.